Give me 1 second and we will be live.
Live in a minute. Sure.
Okay, we're now streaming.
Thank you very much, Dr. Minker. Thank you to everyone joining us for our budget work session. If my count is correct, this is budget work session number 6. We are going to continue where we left off at our last meeting on Tuesday. Madam Clerk, I'd like to call the roll, please.
Mayor Gore,
Here.
Vice Mayor Bennett,
Here.
Counselor Randolph,
Here.
Counselor Holloway,
Here.
Counselor Denton,
Here.
Counselor Pelham.
Present.
Thank you. And so just to annotate for the record, Counselor Parton is not with us because he still is doing his reserve duty. And so time is now 6:31. I'd like to pass it over to Mr. Altman to share who our first presenter is. And I do have the agenda packet on the screen. If there's something else, just let me know and I'll put that up for us.
No, ma'am. I think you've got the presentation in the agenda packet, so that should work. Tonight we have Mr. Jimmy Sanderson with us from Davenport. Davenport, as you know, is our financial advisor. And every year at this time, we have Mr. Sanderson come and give us a presentation and discussion of where we are with regard to our debt and financial standing. So having said that, and we all have met Mr. Sanderson, so I'll turn it over to Mr. Sanderson to begin his presentation.
Thanks, March. Mayor Gore, can you hear me okay?
Yeah, we can
or
hear
March,
you.
can you? Okay,
Yeah,
perfect. Good evening. It's good to see some of you again. This is a similar presentation to what we've given you in the past, and we've updated it obviously to bring it up to date, and we can walk through it. And obviously, if there are any questions, Mayor Gore, I'm not sure how y'all have done this in the past, but if you can find a way to stop me, obviously we can stop, and I'm happy to answer any questions that council has. If you'll scroll to the next page after the cover page, it's titled Tax Supported Bonds. So just scroll down if you would. Perfect. Okay. This is the city's tax supported debt that's outstanding. So these are all of your bonds that are outstanding, and we've listed them from top to bottom. We've numbered them 1 through 17. They're general obligation bonds. Again, those are the ones that are tax supported, paid by taxes. There are some bonds that we'll talk about in a moment that are what we call utility bonds and paid out of enterprise funds. This total amount that you've got here for all of these bonds is about $47 million, and we'll show you the breakout by year on those. And we give you both the original par amount, how much is currently outstanding, what the interest rate on the bonds are, or in some cases you'll see there's a range of interest rates, and that's because different maturities within that bond issue may carry a different interest rate. If you think about it, the longer the bond issue is, usually the higher the interest rate is at the end than at the very beginning. But some of our bonds we did as direct bank loans as opposed to public transactions, and they may just have one singular interest rate for all of the bonds. The final maturity is shown on the far right. And again, so those are the last date that the principal is owed on any of those maturities. So let's go to the next page. This is something that was requested, I believe by Ms. Pelham a few years ago. And so we've included this in here again. This hasn't changed. These are the purposes of each of your bond issues. We went back and looked at the original ordinances that were adopted when the bonds were issued to give you a sense of what the purpose of them were. And you'll see that some of them simply say that they were, the very first one, for example, the 2015 B bonds in the upper left, those were used to refund the 2008 A and the 2009 A bonds. And so
everyone that right now everyone's line is unmuted, which means we can hear you if you're talking in the background. So Please just be mindful of that. And when you're called on to speak, just unmute yourself. And Mr. Davenport, just one moment, Counselor Pelham does have her hands raised. I don't know if she wants you to ask her question that you're going over now, or if she can wait till you finish this slide to ask her question.
Can you go back to the first slide? I couldn't get back in to raise my hand in time.
Okay, I'm on the tax supported bonds outstanding.
So number 5, the general obligation bond, the $7,700,000 bond.
Yes, ma'am.
In our budget, that's the question I was asking. They have it down for 0 payment next year scheduled. I don't know, I can't remember what the answer was, but this looks like it's not going to be paid off until 2038. At $7,320,000 be somewhere budgeted in our budget.
So the $7,320,000 is the total current amount that's outstanding. That
What's
is
the
going to be
due?
paid.
Okay, go ahead.
Yeah, that's going to be paid off between now and 2038. So give me a moment. I'll pull up the
Ms. Pelham,
amortization.
On our budget is on page 101, and it says 0 payment next year scheduled.
so Ms. Pelham, last year, if you remember when we did the budget,
I don't remember anything from last year. Thanks, sorry, but
all right.
I
so
can't remember what I did yesterday talking about last year. Go ahead.
So when we did the budget last year, we had a bump in bond payments that we had to make for that 1 year based on how the payments went. There was an increase last year that we had to make to cover some additional bond debt that we had to make payments on. So this year it's not there. So that $770,000 that's shown in that line item of the budget isn't there, but it's reallocated throughout the budget because we still had debt service, and because of reductions in sales, meals, and lodging, we had to make a transfer from the general fund to the capital fund and debt service fund to cover our debt service obligations. So while there's zero in the budget this year, those funds are being used elsewhere in the budget.
So then you need to tell me where they are then. If you're not going.
But you don't make it's not a straight line transfer of 770,000 from here to here. All the money comes into the general fund and then it's dispersed.
Then it's paid out, but
there's not a direct correlation between that line in the budget from last year to a line in the budget this year.
My question is, you pay every bond payment once a year though, correctly?
Not once a year. There are some bond payments that we pay twice, some bond payments we pay monthly.
So tell me when the budget, if it's 100 line items, tell me when you how you making that payment. Where is it so we can see as a citizen as well as a counselor, how do I know that payment is being paid?
So that payment that 770,000 from last year was because we had an increase in that 1 year for debt service. We don't have that same increase in debt service this year. So that's why it shows 0 in the proposed budget. But those dollars that were used to pay that all come into the general fund, so we have $52 million in the general fund. I don't have a direct correlation between that one line from last year and a line item in this year's budget. That $770,000 has been dispersed throughout the budget to make payment to pay for things.
That makes sense to me.
So, Mr. Altman, I think if I understand Councilor Pelham correctly, I answered her question regarding the 770.
I understand that part about the debt. I want to know when is it going to get paid.
I understand. So, Councilor Pelham, he answered your question. I'm trying to get clarity for you. So if you allow me to speak, I can try to address your question and make sure you get your answer. And if not, we can take this offline, but he's already answered it. So I wanted to make sure you didn't have any lingering questions. We do have a guest and we have the other ones on the line as well. So Mr. Altman already addressed the $770K that you're talking about from last year. If I understand your question correctly, you want to know, since that money is not being used for that purpose this year, he obviously dispersed it throughout the budget. You want to know where the pockets of money go to.
Yes, ma'am.
And we understand it's not gonna be a straight 770 to another line item,
Yes,
but it's
ma'am.
gonna be certain amounts spread throughout the budget.
Yes,
So
ma'am.
we can, okay, so we can try to see where Mr. Altman increase different line items for that amount.
Yes,
And it
ma'am.
might be difficult to do because
But
it's
it
spread
doesn't need to
throughout.
be offline. I mean, people listening to the citizens listening, they need to know where it is too, don't they?
They do, but that answer will require him to come back and show you all the different line items that he possibly could have spread the money out. I mean,
Okay,
'cause
well, that's
it's-
all I'm asking.
Yep, and I'll put that down for the work session that we have at the end to answer all of our outstanding questions. I'm making a note of that. So we'll be able to circle back at that time if that's okay and that addresses your concern.
All right, and Mr. Davenport, in number 13, does that mean that bond payment will be paid? Will that be the last payment due on July the 15th, 2021 next year? Or would it'll be paid in the next fiscal year 22? Or that's this
Let
year
me look.
at all?
I'll have to look. You're looking at the 2005 Ds. I've got that somewhere in here.
It's actually the 2001. In July 15th, that last bond payment will be next budget year, because that's after the July 1 is the beginning of the fiscal year. So July 15th, 2021 would be the 22 budget.
Okay, that's my question. So it's fiscal year 21,
No, it would be fiscal year 22.
fiscal year 22.
Yeah.
Okay. And same
And I think
thing.
Ms. Pelham, it'll be helpful to look at when we get a few pages in, when we put all of this debt together, and you can see what your annual payments of both principal and interest are when you sort of just put them all together, because that's the most important thing, is that, you know, some of them may get paid off at different times, and we've structured your debt so that when you put it all together, that you'll see it's fairly level for a few years, and then it starts to drop down.
And then number 17 with the Patrick Copeland literary loan, that will be paid off this fiscal year in January of next year, correct?
I believe that's correct. Yeah, the final
Okay.
maturity is January 15, 2021. That's correct.
Okay.
And Mr. Sanderson, I'm sorry I called you Mr. Davenport. I was thinking about the name of your company, so I
didn't.
apologize for that.
It's okay.
So Counselor Pelham, you got the answers to the literacy loan, and you got a
Yeah.
partial answer to your
And
other
that
question.
payment for Patrick Copeland, is that in our budget or is that in the school budget?
So Counselor Pelham, can you hear me when I'm speaking?
Nope. I'm sorry, I hadn't finished. Did you want me to stop?
No, you actually had paused, and I was speaking to Mr. Davenport, and I was recapping, and then you jumped in. So I just want to make
I'm sorry.
sure.
I apologize.
You're okay. Just want to capture right now, because you asked several questions. You answered your question about the literacy fund. You had an earlier question regarding number 5. You got
Mhm.
partial answer on that, and you need to have the rest of the information about the 750K. Am I tracking
Yeah.
that correctly? What's your next question?
7.7 million, yeah.
Great. Go ahead.
And
And
the
she
literary
asked-
fund, does that payment come out of school funds or city fund?
That debt's the city's debt, if I'm correct. We pay that debt.
So that 375 will be free and clear next fiscal year. Oh, correct?
Yeah, in 2021, yes, ma'am.
Mhm.
Yeah, not in the proposed year, because we needed to actually make the bond payment this year.
In January, it'd be free fiscal year 22.
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you. I think that's all.
Mr. Altman. Thank you. Mr. Altman, you said you're about to say something as well. What were you about to say?
Well, I was going to answer her question regarding whether it was in the schools or the city budget. The debt is in the city's budget, even though it's because the school can't issue debt, only the city can. So we carry that obligation and those payments.
Okay. Counselor Plum, is that clear?
Yes.
Okay. Mr. Sanderson, you can proceed. I'll go back to this slide where you were talking about the purposes of the bonds we have taken out so far. And I think you were starting that slide when you got some questions, or were you?
Yes, ma'am. Thank you. Yeah, again, so this slide relays the purpose of each of the bond issues that you have outstanding. And what I was pointing out was that, again, in the upper left-hand corner, the 2015 B bonds, the sole purpose of that bond issue was to refund some prior debt. And we've refunded prior debt in many cases in the past. And obviously that's done predominantly to save money. So again, just lowering your interest rate from a higher rate to a lower rate. And so as you go through these, I just want to point out that that's what that means. The 2015 A's, for example, the very next line item, that bond issue hasn't been refunded. And so that's why it just states the purpose of that transaction. If you flip to the next page, Madam Mayor, you'll see we included some of the purposes of bond issues that are older, that have been refunded but are no longer outstanding. So that the 2004 B bonds at the top there, if you were to look back on the prior page, you'll see that a bond issue refunded the 2004 B bonds. They're no longer outstanding, but we wanted you to see the purpose of the original bond issue that was issued. So if you stop there, Madam Mayor, the 2008 B bonds refunded the 2004 B bonds. And so we just did this so you would be able to track what the original purpose of the 2004 B bonds are.
Is there any
Let's flip.
questions on this before he
Go ahead.
goes to the next? And Councilor Pelham, your hand is still raised, and that's from your last turn. So can you lower it, please, so I can make sure I'm tracking the hands correctly? And I'll take it as there are no questions at this time from any members of council. Go ahead, Mr. Sanderson.
Thank you. So this page, and I think Ms. Pelham, this will be helpful. What I was trying to get to earlier. This is when we take all of your debt and put it all together by fiscal year. So some of your payments for various pieces of your debt are paid on different dates, both principal and interest. They're not all due on the same date. And so we roll them all up into fiscal year, importantly, so that you can budget appropriately. So this is all of your tax supported debt by fiscal year. And you can see that right now in FY21, we're just north of $5 million, and it stays there for another year, and then it drops down to 4.7 million, stays basically there until you get out to 2028, and it drops to 3.5 million. That's a fairly standard and typical way that localities structure their debt. You will have other projects that you're going to take on over time. And so what this drop down in your debt service means is that when you do take on other projects and you finance them, that we would try to layer in that new debt service into your existing debt service in those step downs, and that would help offset any impact on your budget if the debt service were to increase because you layered it in right away. One of the things we've got on here also is your payout ratio. It's right below the graph on the left. Your payout ratio is a calculation of how much debt you pay off over the next 10 years. And so think about it this way. So you're paying off 70+% of all of your debt within a 10-year period. The rating agencies use that as a way to gauge the rapidity of your debt repayment, and to make sure that you're not backloading your debt so that all of your debt isn't paid off away at the end, and then you're sort of pressuring budgets way down the road. So this fiscal year, you're going to be paying off over 3.5 million of principal, and you got 1.4 million of interest. So let me stop there and see if there's any questions.
Yes, perfect. Mr. Altman has his hand raised. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I just wanted to tie back into the question that Ms. Pelham asked earlier about the literary loan at Copeland, which has outstanding debt. If we notice that once that debt is paid off in this fiscal year, but for the following year, we don't see but a small reduction in our total debt service payment. So we're only going to see about an $11,000 reduction in total debt service, because other debt, principal and interest, kicks in because of that layering. So while we may be paying off a bond, we're not going to see this huge drop, as you can see here with our debt service payment plan.
Thank you, Mr. Altman. Counselor Pelham has her hand raised.
So that's only 11,000 and the payment was 375. So what happens in the difference, Mr. Davenport, between the 11,000 reduction for next year and that seemingly the $360,000 we would have extra? If I paid off my house loan, I get a free mortgage, no more.
Right. So when you think about your debt, again, what the way we've structured it, and this happens with refundings and
Yeah,
and the sort, we structure it so that your debt service is gonna try to be level and then step down. So where you have this one payment of $700,000 going away, for example, on one of your pieces that you're paying off, or 300,000, whatever it was, because that's going away, there's another piece of debt that steps up by a similar amount. Again, and when you put it all together,
okay, so you automatically program that other money to pay off another debt.
you're exactly.
So that's
That's
the
right.
structure of it. Okay. All right.
Yeah. So if you think about it, we don't have one mortgage. We have bond issues, and as we had on the other page, you've got 17 bond issues out there, and so as one rolls off, another one may step up and eat into that. So that page that shows the total debt service that you have is really the one that you should look at when you're thinking ahead and looking for that relief in debt service. That's really going to take place out in 2023, where your debt service drops by $300,000 or so that year. And again, all of that assumes that between now and then, we're not taking on any additional debt that we would have to layer into that existing debt service levels.
Is this total supported debt service of $58 million? That's the total. What other debt do we have? Because I thought I saw something that was $74 million, what the city was in total debt. Is that what?
So your total debt, you really need to think about as usually when you use that term, we're talking about the principal. So that's that first column right there. That's the just over $47 million. In addition to that 47 million, there is other debt related to utilities that we track separately, because it's not paid from taxes that the general taxpayer pays, but is paid from service fees related to the utilities. So this is the debt that I would describe as the citizens of Hopewell pay for from their taxes, whether that's sales, meals, or real estate taxes.
And what is the total of the utility service fee debt that we have?
We'll get to that in a few pages if you want to wait, or I'm happy to tell you that now.
No, we'll wait. You can just bring it out.
Okay.
This is what you were asking about. Thank you.
Yes, ma'am.
Does anyone else have any questions right now about tax support debt service before we move on?
Mayor Gore?
Yes.
Yeah, this is Michael. I apologize. I had dialed in on time, but I wasn't getting through, so I had to come off and come back in. And while the discussion was going on, Mrs. Pelham, Council Pelham, and the city manager about the $770,000 on screen 101, it might be helpful. And I think Mrs. Pelham wanted the citizens also to know, if you could go back to that screen, I might be able to help everybody out very quickly. 101, page 101.
Yeah.
That we actually don't have that page from the budget in tonight's presentation.
Okay. All right. Well,
It's in the budget, Mr. Terry. I have the budget expenditure document up. So you're saying it's page 101 of that PDF document?
yes, ma'am.
Okay, I can go to it because I had all these up just in case we need to flip around. So
Yeah.
I'm scrolling
And I
down
want to
on
make
page.
sure Mrs. Pelham is talking about that $770,000.
Okay.
It's 7.7 million, I think. Isn't it?
No, ma'am. This is $770,000. That's the amount in the current year budget. Once the mayor gets there.
Mr. Terry, is this the page you're referring to, sir?
I can't
Yes.
see it.
Yes,
I'm looking at a hard copy, page 101. Okay,
Yes.
Mhm.
under the column that says current year budget,
yes.
that's what we're in now, fiscal year 2020. And the $770,000, I believe, is what Mrs. Pelham is speaking about. I
Yes,
think
sir.
where the issue was going was that looking at Davenport's schedule, that's up in the millions. So I want to bring everybody back that
Oh, yeah.
this is $770,000 in this year, 2020. There is no payment for that in the 20 FY budget. But if you go all the way down to the bottom of the page and you see the total debt for FY20 is 5.2 million, 35,564.
Mhm.
And for FY21 is 5,167,000, roughly a negative 1.3%. And the point is that the 770,000 is not transferred anywhere. The debt went down for 21, and Mr. Simpson can elaborate that since we got this debt schedule from him, and that's what's the way it was structured. So that 770,000 moved along the other debt that we have to pay within here, and it also worked out that the way it's structured, we're going to be a little bit lesser for 21. So I just wanted to
Hey,
clarify.
Mike, this is Jimmy. This is a great slide to demonstrate it. And Ms. Pelham, if you look at the very top
Yeah.
two line
Mhm.
items, you'll see they
Yeah.
were 0 in the prior years, and they jump up to 475,000 the first one, and then the second one jumps up to 125, and the third line item goes from 100 to 217. So that's almost exactly on top of that 770. So where the 770,000 goes away, it's being replaced by payments that are owed on other bond issues, and those first three pretty much take care of that.
Yeah, that's what I was wondering about, because for those first two, I couldn't find a admin fee for those payments, and I was going to ask that question, said now I know why. I guess because it's paying off some other debt somewhere else.
Exactly.
Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Mayor.
Thank you, Mr. Cherry, as well.
So we'll take that question off of our tracking list. It seems like everything has been answered so far that's been asked. So I'll go back to the agenda packet that I had on the screen. And Mr. Sanderson, let me know which page you want me to stop on. Are we back here at the graph?
Up out of mute, I'm sorry. Let's go one more slide after that, Madam Mayor.
Okay.
And this right here, this is just a breakdown of the prior page in a little bit more detail. We have tracked for the city debt service, that first sort of third of the page on the left that says existing city geo debt service. And there we're distinguishing sort of the general fund of the city, the administrative side of the city, versus the middle, which is debt that's been issued for schools. And so some of your bond issues funded both city general governmental projects as well as school projects. And so we use this just to break it out so you would have an understanding of how much of your debt has been issued for governmental purposes other than schools, and how much has been issued for schools there in the middle as well. And the far right column just sums them all together, and you'll see that it ties back to the prior page as well. So they're not separate bond issues necessarily, but this is just a way that we have tracked based off the use of those bond issues, the difference between schools and other governmental uses.
If there's any questions on this before we move on? Okay, no one's has their hands raised, and those joining by phone, if you have a question, just say Madam Mayor, and I'll stop to make sure you're acknowledged.
So this page goes to the city, we call your debt capacity. You have a policy limit of 5% of the total assessed value of your property within the city is what you've you've put as a sort of a self-governing cap on yourselves. There's a constitutional limitation as well, and that's 10%. So you're at a good level underneath that at 5%. And I wanted to show you just two different calculations of that so you could see where you are. And if you take the first, we've got the total assessed value of your real estate, which is almost 1.4 billion. A 5% of that would put you at just shy of $69 million of total debt that you could have outstanding and still be within that policy. The next line item shows you what the current tax supported debt is that's outstanding as of June 30, 2020. That's that 47 million that we talked about. So under your current policies, you have capacity to issue almost an additional $22 million. That's said differently from what we call affordability. So this just shows what you could borrow and be under your policies. You still have to look at how are you going to pay for it as you add it to your existing debt service. But that's that almost $22 million. The next few lines, what we did was, again, we took the same assessed value, the same city policy, but we showed how much debt was outstanding as of July 31, 2020, because you make some of your payments in early July of the fiscal year, and so you're reducing your debt by just north of $2 million or so in the very beginning of the fiscal year. So as of June 31 of 2020, you would have additional debt capacity, taking you up to $24.3 million. So again, as you're paying down outstanding debt, you're increasing your debt capacity under your current policies. We can move to the next page, Madam Mayor, unless there's any questions.
I don't see any hands raised, so we'll move on.
I do have a question. I'm sorry. Our limitation was 10%. The state, you said the state.
Yes, ma'am. It's under the state constitution. There is a 10% limitation on general obligation debt,
and we put
without having a referendum. You have as a city, you have a policy, a city council policy limit of 5%. So you've imposed upon yourself a 5% limit. The state, yes, ma'am. The state has a 10% limitation.
Right, so, yeah, thank you.
All right, let's go to the next slide. And this is, we wanted to give you, again, this is your general obligation credit rating history. And you can see there, this goes back to 89 and what your ratings have done since then. Back in 98, we picked up ratings from both S&P and Fitch. So at that point, you had 3 ratings from all of the credit rating agencies. At the end of the between 2011 and 2014, you were upgraded a little bit by some of the rating agencies. So from Moody's, if you go down, you'll see that you ended up at a AA3 rating. S&P ultimately had you at a AA rating, and Fitch had you at a AA minus rating. So all in the AA category, and the only category above that is AAA. And so there's variations in the AA category. Take Moody's, which is an easy way to think about it. Moody's has in their AA category AA1, AA2, and AA3. AA1 is the highest, and AA3 is the lowest within that category. So you have some room to move up into that AA category. I think, as we all know, beginning in 2017, our ratings were withdrawn by Moody's. At that point, S&P and Fitch followed in 2018 to withdraw our ratings, and that is because we haven't been able to produce our CAFRs on time and in a way that they can review our credit and provide a public rating to the market. So because they didn't have that information and it's not current, they are unable to provide a rating on the city's general obligation pledge.
Thank you. Does anyone have any questions regarding our credit rating history? I don't see any hands raised, but I actually have a question on this because, as you know, I've always been interested in the credit rating status for the city. I have three questions. First one is, when we last discussed this in depth, when you came down to city council, we increased the sewer fee amount because we were under the impression that it would help regarding the amount of revenue they had in their reserves. And that would be a show of a positive sign to help with potentially getting our credit rating back. Obviously, we have more work to do in regards to getting our audits done, so we'll be able to apply for that. But from this sewer aspect, is there any other changes or things that we can do in the meantime that can also help with potentially being in good standing with credit rating agencies?
So great question. So you've got, and we're going to get to the enterprise funds in a moment, but it's great to make that clear here. This rating just relates to your general obligation pledge. So the pledge that you say, we're going to pledge to raise our taxes if it's necessary to pay off any debt that we have. That's what this is gauging here. The utility credit had a separate rating, and we've got that laid out for you as well, Madam Mayor. And I'm sorry?
I can wait for you to get to that section unless you want to
okay.
do it.
Yeah, no, we can go through that and when we get there, but absolutely the willingness of you as a governing body to make sure that you're keeping your sewer rates consistent to bring in the sufficient amount of revenue and not deplete your reserves, that goes to your sewer credit. And obviously it would be a credit positive to the rating agencies. I think that's the conversation that we had was, when we're ready to go back to them, we've got our audits to be able to present to them. We also want to be able to demonstrate that the city has, as cost of services have increased, that you have also increased the fees associated with those enterprise funds.
And so since this page is only talking about like the city's credit rating, when we last spoke as well, you shared that you would be of assistance if we wanted to have any other recommendations or develop a plan to try to get our credit rating back. You just gave some examples for the sewer. Unfortunately, since we still haven't got our CAFRs caught up in our audits, we haven't had that conversation. But it would be interesting to see if you could share some of that in advance, because we should be getting done with those soon. I know we're in 18 has been submitted. We have 19, 20 to go. But I think, especially with this council and the new members, it would be great to start having that conversation as a team so we can start thinking long-term about what we can do from both sides to improve our ability to get back our ratings.
Yeah, and you've hit on it. The biggest thing is to be able to produce our CAFRs and provide those in a timely manner to the market. So I understand that we're moving forward with the 2018 CAFR. I suspect there's also some issues, unfortunately, given the environment that we're in now. The auditors are having to do that remotely. That's not my world, but I can imagine that it's going to be more difficult than it would be to do it sitting in the offices of the city. But I think that's something that we're all going to have to deal with, meaning all cities, towns, and counties across the country, because those audits are going to begin to be done virtually, at least here in the near term. Hopefully that will change soon.
Thank you so
But
much.
we have a couple of slides that we'll show a little bit later too, as the sort of the main drivers of your credit rating, Madam Mayor, and I think that will be helpful for you to think about, and for me to help or maybe frame it a little bit as to those things that you do have control over and things that you don't.
Thank you so much.
The next slide that we have up here, this is the city's utility bond. So again, when we're talking before about the tax supported debt, this is something that's totally separate, and it's not secured by the tax pledge of the city. These are solely secured by certain revenue pledges that have been made. The first three bonds that you see on there, that's what I call the regional wastewater debt. Those three bond issues do not have a rating on them. They're totally separate from what I call the city's sewer system credit, which does have a rating. But that regional wastewater debt is associated with the commission. It's paid for by all of the members of the commission, including the city. But it is a separate credit from the bonds that are listed in items in lines 4, 5, and 6 that do have a separate bond issue rating that we got for the city back in, I think, 2009 or 2010. So you've got, again, there's the amounts that are outstanding, same as we had before. Original par amount, current amount outstanding, the interest rates, and the final maturity. And I think if we flip to the next page, Madam Mayor, you'll see here, this page right here. This is the amortization of those two pots of debt. So on the left-hand side is the existing sewer debt service. That's the city's sewer projects, total of $22.2 million. We structured that as level debt service. So if you go over two more columns where it's the total, that's the principal and the interest added together, it is level over the life of the loan. And that's very common for utility credits at $1,628,000. So you know exactly what your debt service is going to be going forward. And what you do is obviously you have to set your rates in a way that can pay all of your operating expenses as well as pay your debt service. The right-hand side, again, is that what I'll call the regional wastewater debt service. It consisted of those three bond issues that we showed on the prior page. Their debt service drops in 23. You can see it goes from $1,270,000 to just shy of $1 million, and then out in 27 it drops again, and that's as each of those three bond issues roll off over time, and that totals just north of $9 million currently outstanding.
Any questions on these two before one? Okay, there are no hands raised. Councilor Pelham.
So with this 37 million, we can't add that with the tax supported debt service. That's the total amount of debt we owe as a city.
Yeah, again, Ms. Pelham, I want to make sure when you look at it that way, you're looking at the principal amount outstanding, which is the 22 million here.
Right.
So that is absolutely.
Okay, go ahead.
Yeah, and I was gonna say that's absolutely all debt of the city. They're just paid from different sources. So the 22 million is paid from sewer fees, and that was what Madam Gore was talking about earlier, that we wanted to make sure we kept up our sewer rates that are then used to pay both operating expenses of the sewer system, but also to pay this debt service right here, shown on the left hand side.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
The next page is what we were talking about, the city's utility credit rating history. And again, when we had our ratings from Moody's and S&P and Fitch, they were very good ratings. Moody's had us at in 2011 at A1, S&P had us at AA minus, and Fitch had us at AA minus. Those are all very strong ratings. And again, then you can see what they did was they started to downgrade the utility credit, again, based on the lack of information available to in order to rate them. And then eventually they withdrew the credit ratings in 2017 and 2018, similar to what we saw on the general fund side. So we don't currently have any ratings on the utility bonds, and we don't have a current rating on the general obligation side. The next slide, Madam Mayor, if you'll flip to there, this was one where we wanted to give you the next few slides are like that, and we can go into as much detail as you would like. It gets fairly detailed, but this is a good sort of gauge of just the four areas that are key drivers to your general obligation rating. It's the economic base, obviously is important. Demographics, what's your tax base, the size, the structure, what's your industry mix, the financial performance down at the bottom, and flexibility. They're really looking at what your expenditure structure is, your revenue structure, what patterns are there? How have you done on your annual operating versus your budgetary performance? Your fund balance position is important to them, obviously. The debt factors in the upper right. What's the pledge? That second bullet is what we talked about. How much are you paying off your debt? How quickly you're paying it off? But they also look at whether you are under investing in your capital facilities as well. So some localities might look at it and say, we don't have any debt outstanding. But the next question that the rating agencies would look at it would be whether are you cash funding those capital projects, or do you have a fair amount of maintenance that you need to do with your projects or with your capital projects. And the bottom one is management factors. They want to look and see what are you adhering to your long-term financial plan and policies. I mean, you have policies in place, and then one of the questions would be, are you staying within those policies? You know, when you do your budget, are you staying within your budget when you do your annual budget every year? Is there any financial forecasting that's done? Those are some of the things that they'll look at and see. See, that really goes to planning and their comfort level that you're doing the things on an annual basis that would raise any red flags that you as a council then may need to, you know, pivot and go a different direction, that you're doing that long-term planning. The next 2 pages go into a little bit more detail with both Moody's and S&P, and these are very specific pieces. And the rating agencies, after the last financial crisis in the early 2000s, they got sort of dinged a little bit because they weren't very transparent. And so what they did was they came up with some weighting factors to come up with an initial rating for all jurisdictions. And you can see here that they've divided them into various percentages. The economy and the tax base is worth 30%. Within that category, there's 3 subcategories: tax base, size, your full value per capita, and your wealth or your median family income. They all count within a certain percentage, and so on down the road. And so you can take any given jurisdiction and do a scorecard that'll give you a general understanding of where your rating might be, and that's fairly transparent. There are some things, though, that are still a little bit of a black box, and that's what that last bullet on the left is. They can adjust whatever mathematical rating they come up with under each of those percentages based on some other qualitative factors. It may be the total debt that you have outstanding, or how fast you're paying back your debt. And so they do have some ability to adjust based off the flat out math that you might do. And so some of these categories you have some control over in the short term. Maybe you have some control over them in the long term as well. But you certainly, for example, you can't change your tax base size immediately. So Mayor Gore, if you wanted to really hone in on some of these line items as to what you could do, although you may be able to grow your tax base through economic development, incentives, things like that over a longer period of time, you're not going to be able to really crank up that one piece right away. Others, fund balance, you can increase your fund balance over a shorter period of time. Again, not necessarily immediately, but there are ways to do that as well. The institutional framework, for example, in item number 3, all localities in Virginia get the highest rating on that one that you can get, because of just the way Virginia is structured, different than other states. Virginia has a very good way that you can, if you have to, you can raise your taxes as much as you want in order to cover whatever your operating and debt service expenses are. Some jurisdictions have limitations on their ability to raise tax rates. So this is the type of area that we could dive in and look and see where are the areas that we could work to increase and improve our rating. Obviously the biggest piece right away is getting those CAFRs done and being able to present those to the rating agencies. The next slide, Madam Mayor, is a very similar slide, but it's for S&P. again, they're doing that transparency thing. They've got a few more buckets that they have to look at, 7 in this case. But you have some control over them, more than others. But it's the same type of analysis that you can do. You can do a scorecard based on where Hopewell stands, and then you can look and see where you need to move in order to get each of these individual line items up one more rating category. And then at the end of the day, what they do is they just add all of the points that you get up, and that point sum equates to a rating. And then again, there can be some adjustments that they can make after this purely qualitative analysis or quantitative analysis. They can make some qualitative adjustments to the rating. So, Madam Mayor, that's the presentation that we have, and it's great to see everybody, or some of you that I can see you, and I'm happy to answer any more questions that you have.
Thank you so much for your presentation. I'll just do a round robin to make sure that anyone doesn't have any questions right now. Councilor Randolph, do you have any questions about anything in the presentation?
No, thank you, Mr. Sanderson. I appreciate it as always.
Yes, ma'am.
Vice Mayor Bennett,
No, thank you.
Councilor Holloway, she might be muted. Councilor Pelham, Councilor Denton,
No, I don't have any questions, but it was a very good explanation, and I, believe it or not, I understood a lot of what you said. Thank you very much.
I'm glad. Thank you.
Councilor Pelham,
Yes, question. The 74 million with wastewater that we borrowed, I don't know, 2 or 3 years ago, or whenever it was, they had some project. I don't know if you were aware of that, but we got 44 million from somewhere and 5 million from the state or whatever, but it left a gap of 24 million. Now, I think, March, you told me that once that was, we got a bond for that. And is that in this presentation? If we did, it was during the time we weren't bonded, so I was wondering, how did we get a bond? Process,
So
if we did do that.
So Ms. Pelham, we did that project in 2 phases. The first phase, the city took on the full brunt of the project by moving the primary plant from the old landfill over. And I think that is the 2011 series bonds, I believe, the 18 million. I think that was.
You go back a few slides.
Mr. Bond man can do that.
Yeah, move forward to there. It's slide page number 8. I think will be helpful. Yes, ma'am. Keep going.
the sewer section, and it's Mr. Sanderson and Mr. Altman.
There you go, right there. Perfect.
Proper approach.
Go back up a little bit.
8.
Right there. I think, and March, this is what you were referring to, numbers 4, 5, and
Right.
6.
Tell me how we got, where'd that 24 million get regapped or whatever y'all do?
March, you want to talk? You want me to talk?
Well, I can say, so I was here for the first phase, which I think is the series from 2011, where we
That's
moved
number 4.
probably 4 and 5, but I know for sure probably 4, because we took on that portion of the project solely on the city's behalf, and we did get a grant for a portion of that project, which then, so that was, if that was a $24 million project and we got a $6 million grant, then the 18 million would represent the difference that we had to then go and bond to finance that project.
Excuse me, I'm not talking about that far back. This was when Mark Haley was here. When some bond that we did with wastewater and that project. Do you remember, Madam Mayor, the $74 million project that went on down there? memory's not that great, but I know we had enough to pay out $49 million of it. March, you were not here. So
Correct.
did anyone contact you? Did it come through city council, Mr. Anderson?
So here, I'll give you my memory of it, right? So back in 2009, we knew we had this large project and it was going to be paid from a number of different pots. The city had a piece. There was a fairly large grant that came, I believe, from the state through DEQ in order to upgrade the plant. And so that's what the series 2010 and 2011 bonds paid for at first. That was the city's portion of that project. And then in addition to that, those three bond issues, then there was obviously the grant money that came in, and then I believe maybe what you're remembering is that 2000, what's number one on there, industry had some costs associated with the plant as well. Some of the members of industry paid cash, and others borrowed through the regional wastewater system in that 2015 transaction.
Can you put that
and so
back?
that's what.
Excuse me, somebody moved the chart.
I think the mayor dropped off of the call.
Okay.
I have it. I can share my screen if you want me to.
You can, please.
Jimmy, go ahead.
All right,
And
hold on.
Jimmy, why you do that? This is Charlie. If I remember correctly, that grant amount was 48 million or something in that ballpark.
No, the whole project was 74 million.
Right, but 48 million of it was paid with the federal and state
Yeah.
grant, if I'm not
Yeah,
mistaken.
49 million was. That's what I'm saying. Where did the 24 million go? That's what how was that financed? That's what.
Well, we had a portion of it, but industry also paid a portion of it. So that's that
but
5
how
million, whatever.
If we had a portion of it, when did it come through council is my question. And when did we approve? If it was a bond that we approved, where is it in this series of bonds that's outstanding?
And this is Jimmy. Can you see my screen now?
Yes, sir. Yes.
Okay. Yeah. And Ms. Pelham, absolutely. The bond issues that you're talking about that did come to council were items 4, 5, and 6. Those were that's when we set up the sewer system. We didn't want to issue those bonds as general obligation bonds. We wanted them to be paid from the sewer fees that the customers, our citizens, and some others pay. And so we set up a separate separate credit, which I'll call this the sewer credit. And that was what we had talked about earlier with those other ratings. And those are the bond issues that funded the city's portion of the plant. And absolutely, we brought all of those bond issues to council for approval.
Okay. Yep. 3, 2, and 1.
4, 5, and 6.
Okay.
Are the
Yeah.
ones that.
And the ones 3, 2, and 1. It was that exclusively for the plant to pay the industry to pay.
That's correct. But you, the city, are also a part of the commission.
Yes. One, whatever.
One of the however many. But yeah, those are paid under the agreement that you have with the industry, again, which the city is a part. The 4, 5, and 6 are funded purely from the residential users and some others, but of the city sewer system.
Okay. Finally got an answer. Thank you.
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you. And Mr. Altman, can you just maintain controls until I come in to get my software updates? So my computer is probably going to do the same thing again eventually. So it's just safer right now for you to keep the controls of it because I need to get my updates first.
I'll grab everything and get ready.
Thank you. I apologize for that as well, but also I want to say thank you very much, Mr. Sanderson, for joining us virtually and giving us this great update and answering all of our questions that you had And you've been working with us for a number of years now, so you pretty much know how we like to work and questions that we're going to ask in anticipation. So you did a great job of making sure you had those included in the packet for us. I really do appreciate that.
Thank you very much. It's great to be with you again.
Be safe.
Thank you.
All
Yes, ma'am.
right. Mr. Altman, we can take a break so you can get the other items on the screen before you call our next speaker.
So we have, we've got the line item budgets up for Circuit Court Clerk. I'm not sure if Ms. Ward is with us. I think she sent information to y'all indicating that I think she may have addressed y'all's questions if I remember correctly.
Yes.
Okay. So the next item, the next agenda, the next budget up would be Commonwealth Attorney. Mr. Newman, I believe Mr. Newman is with us.
Good evening, everyone. Can you hear me?
Yes, sir.
Yes.
I wanted to talk to y'all a little bit about the budget coming up and explain kind of what's going on. So as it stands right now, I'm requesting an additional attorney for this upcoming budget. Last year, the General Assembly passed a budget that mandated that any office in the Commonwealth that had 75 body cams was entitled for the locality to fund another attorney slot. And if you have over 75, an additional attorney slot. We have 94. Last year, Mr. Altman came to me and basically said the city couldn't afford to budget it. At the time, I told him that I felt like there wasn't a present need, and I agreed to delay it for a year. And in my emails that I've sent to you, you can see the copy of that agreement. You can see a copy of the budget bill that was passed. So at any rate, I'd asked him for 2 slots at the beginning of the year. Of course, that was before this pandemic happened. And so I'm willing to delay that at least another year. I know we're going to all have problems. However, I cannot delay another year with another attorney, and there's 2 reasons. One, effective July 1, we have new discovery rules, and these are far different than it's ever been in my entire career, 35 years. We're going to have 3 to 4 times more work to comply with those rules. That's the biggest pressing issue. In addition, we previously had been having the officers' body cam videos shared to us, and we weren't getting them all. Such as, say, there's several officers out on a crime scene, and we'd only maybe get the lead officer's body video, which was fine at the time. But now, because of those new rules, we have to review and redact each and every video that's made on any particular case. So what has happened is we now, instead of having them share it, we now going to have licenses that we can go in and get anything that's been captured. The department is also starting to put evidence onto the body camera website, basically digital evidence, so we can obtain that without them having to bring it to us, such as pictures, that kind of thing. So that's where I am, and I sent everybody a cover letter with what I was asking for the one attorney. And as far as the increases on some of the things, I basically take, for example, something costs $100 for 4 attorneys, which is what myself and my 3 assistants included. So we divided it, 100 by 4. So we added extra $25 to cover the expense for the additional attorney. And so that's, I was just wondering if anybody had any questions they'd like to ask. And I hate doing this at this time with this pandemic, but I don't have any choice.
Thank you so much, Mr. Newman. I do see some hands raised from Councilor Pelham and Councilor Randolph, but I think Councilor Pelham's hand was up from the last time, so I'll call on Councilor Randolph first. And if that is incorrect, Councilor Pelham, you can go after her.
It's incorrect, but go ahead.
Mr. Newman, I want to again ask the cost of that employee, and that'll give you 4 attorneys, correct?
Excuse me.
That would give me 4 assistants at that point, yes.
Right. Okay. And what do you anticipate that salary and including benefits to cost, that if it's not in this budget line?
You should have that paperwork.
I did, but I just want to make sure that it's out to the public so that you can tell us.
It was 60,000 I requested, plus
Right.
benefits, which is
Okay.
hospitalization, BRS. So
Yes. Okay.
What's that?
So the total would come to, I think it was over 80,000, right?
that would sound about right with the
It's
benefits.
81 if I'm not mistaken.
I think that's correct.
And you have included some travel and other things in your budget. Are you aware that council is looking at cutting all travel potentially for this coming budget year as a potential for saving?
I was not aware of it, but most of that travel strictly is for continuing legal education credits, which we have to have in order
Okay.
to have bar licenses.
Well, if we get to that point, we would be asking the city manager to check with everybody for what their travel is for, I would imagine. And
I will tell you, this year, we really didn't get any travel. They actually did the CLE credits by Zoom.
yes,
I was actually, got permission from Mr. Altman, but I was actually able to pay for the prorated first year for the body cam licenses for this fiscal year and for the following fiscal year. So that's covered out of this budget. So that kind of eliminated one of the expenses.
and how much is that and where is that at on this?
It would be under, well, it's not on there because
Okay.
I'm paying for it out of this budget. And I want to say it was somewhere around $2,300 and some dollars a year.
Okay, so that's $2,300 that we aren't seeing in your proposed budget because you paid for it in this current year budget.
Yes.
Okay,
Well, we're in the process of paying.
okay, okay, thank you. Those were all the questions I had.
Okay.
Thank you, Councilor Randolph. Councilor Pelham?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Newman, as well. What's my question? And there's the increase I asked you about in service contracts from 1,000 to 10,000. What is that inclusive of? Does that have something to do with the body cams too?
No, that's strictly with, we have, currently we have one, we call it pistol, which gives us access to all the police reports. That's given to us complimentary of the police department. It's been like that since I've been here. But we need 2 more additional ones so that we can handle doing this new discovery. So that's the biggest increase is what you're seeing is the pistol license.
And that's just a report. So that's the agency that does the reporting for you?
No, they don't do reporting. It's the best thing I can say. It's the program that allows us to access the police reports directly from the police department.
Oh, okay. And is the city clerk count, is the city, I mean, the circuit court young man here too? Are you representing that budget?
The circuit court young man.
The lawyer that supports the sheriff, the court, judge. We have a budget.
No, that has nothing to do with us.
Oh, I know. I didn't think so, but I'm saying, is he, do you know, is he here March?
No, ma'am, he's not.
Okay, because his budget, he has like $41,000 in miscellaneous fees. And so if we can't get a total explanation about why we have that much money in miscellaneous, that could be half the cost of the lawyer, the lawyer's fee for Mr. Newman's office. But that's and the 80,000 for the new attorney is not included in what we have, right, Mr. Newman?
No, not with what Mr. Altman submitted to you.
Right, that, okay, so we just have to come up with.
And all the extra expense was in that email that I submitted to
All
everyone.
right, okay, all right, great. That's all I, and the other thing is too, when Ms. Randolph was talking about mileage and conferences and stuff, I think that is a great idea, but it's just what each department probably have to tell us is how much would it cost for you to cover a conference and certifications on Zoom or whatever circuit you're gonna use, but it will be cheaper because people won't be going to hotels and traveling.
Right, and I'm hoping.
Not get the total, but we probably won't take away from people can have to be certified, you know, by doing it at their desk versus going to their place.
Right, and I'm hoping that they will do more of that even when we get back to what may
Yeah.
be or may not be normal, but.
Right, and it's reasonable to do it that way too.
I actually like it better myself because
Yeah, me too.
you don't have to go somewhere and be somewhere. So
I don't want to do no traveling in the next 2 years. All right,
really,
thank you so much.
thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Newman. And just to recap, there's 2 questions that are outstanding. One has nothing to do with your budget, but it was asked during your time. It was about the courts miscellaneous. And then the travel question that is already outstanding. We already addressed that about 2 work sessions ago. Mr. Altman is supposed to be reaching out to everyone to see if their organizations have moved virtually and what that might look like. So that's on the list to talk about at our work session. That is a wrap up for all the outstanding items. Mr. Altman, are you tracking that for now?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. And Mr. Newman, thank you so much for joining us, being back on this format. Apologize we didn't get to you Tuesday and that you were on the line, but I'm grateful that you emailed the information out and that you're here to answer questions. I do see Councilor Randolph's hand is raised, but before we go to her, I just want to say thank you for your time and being transparent for all the citizens. We have more people joining us remotely now that we're all quarantining and staying safer at home. So I think overall, this is a good experience for residents to know kind of more about what your department does and your office does and more about what you're asking for in the budget. So thank you for your time.
Thank you.
And Councilor Randolph?
Yes, ma'am. I just wanted to say that we needed Mr. Altman to, sorry, to adjust the budget to reflect and talk to Mr. Newman about the additional person that is going to be required so that we have an updated budget to go by as we go through this process. Thank you.
Thank you for making sure we captured that. I've added that to the list. Thank you very much. All right. Any other last minute comments or questions for Mr. Newman before we let him go? Okay, there are no hands raised. Anyone joining us remotely, please, on the phone, please just jump in and let me know if you have anything to share. All right, thank you for your time.
Thank you all. Have a good evening.
Thank you, Mr. Newman.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you.
Mr. Altman, before we move forward to the next department, I just want to make sure that we're tracking. For Davenport, I think all the questions were answered for him while he was presenting. Is that correct?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. So we've got these three for Newman right now that we're tracking so far.
So yeah, we've got the attorney, travel, and then the circuit court piece, which is really separate from Mr. Newman, but we'll answer that question.
All right. All right. Thank you. You can go on to the next person.
Next, we'll have Sheriff Kephart, and he has joined us on the line, and I will turn it over to him.
Good evening, everyone. Glad I could make it back. I guess the first question is, did everybody get responses to questions that were asked before the last meeting?
No. Oh,
I saw your email, Sheriff Kephart. I got it via email. Hopefully the other members of council did as well.
I did.
I think they were your questions to begin with, Ms. Pelham.
I know they were, but I don't remember reading it.
I got it.
Yeah, I think.
Okay. Well, just go through them for me, please.
Okay.
And everyone, Sheriff Kephart, can you adjust your camera because we just see the top of your head? There we go. I see you now.
How about I just cut me off? You don't really need to see me, do you?
I see you now, though. I see you're good.
Probably not.
Show that handsome face.
Yeah, okay. I'm definitely gonna cut it off now. The first question I think you had was how many personnel are covered by the full-time salary line? That was your first one, and it's 12. There are 10 of those are in the court system, 2 are in the 295 arena. Service contracts was the second question, and I'm assuming that you're curious about the increase from 13,000 to 33. What made that go up was a $20,000 piece that was added in there for our taser / our body cam program that had been covered in the past under capital, and for some reason, I guess, and I don't know the schematics as to why, but it was changed and we needed to put it into a line, so we put it into the service contract budget line. So real briefly, it's in the operating budget because it's an annual ongoing expense. It's not something that we can capitalize, so that's why now it's in the operating budget.
So you took 20,000 away from the capital?
No, we had 20,000 in operating. We had capital. We didn't move it from capital back into operating. We still dealt with capital and debt service on that side of the house, but we found the $20,000 in the operating budget to be able to handle it here, since it's an ongoing expense and not a capital expense. Similar to what we did with Mrs. Griffin last year when we brought her grass cutting over from capital to operating.
Okay. Thank you.
The next one is advertising. What's included in the $500 advertising line? That's a line we use for sheriff sales, or basically really the only thing that it's used for. If we have levies or writs where we have to go out and seize property and then have sales, we have to advertise it. That's what that's used for. Does that answer your question on that?
Mm-hmm.
Next one is Project Lifesaver, budgeted 7,000, spent 251 and 7 again. And then, however, is this a grant? It is not a grant funded position. It's a line that we had asked for. I think last year it got put in as a line item. We have right now, we average about 12 kids, a couple of adults every year on the program. Cost about $400 to put them on the program, and then probably between $100 and $150, I think, a year to maintain each person with the equipment that we have to upgrade. I think it's the 251. I believe that's more in the $2,500 range as far as what we've spent this year out of that line. That line, like the uniform line, we stopped spending back, I guess, mid to end March of this year. It's to conserve, really, is why we have that money left over in there. We were with with the COVID thing, we were trying to cut corners where we could and not spend money with it. We really could do without. I said, we really can't do without it, but we're making do.
Hey, Sheriff Kephart,
Yes,
could
sir.
you just expand on who those people involved in Lifesaver are?
Yeah, special needs.
Yes, it's a program that's designed for autistic children, Alzheimer's patients, and anybody with a cognitive brain function that's been lessened, I guess. It's a system by where we put a band on them and they wear it 24/7, and if they go missing, we come out and find them, track them, I guess is a better, lack of a better word. Is that?
That does.
Councilor Pell, okay.
That was the question I was going to ask that Mr. March explained the program. I thought that was the program, but I wasn't sure.
Right.
Thank you.
Okay.
The next thing on the list was the phone and the fax. Do I need to do that, or is that pretty
No.
much, it's the same as all?
We'll deal with that at the end.
Okay, the next.
Well, let me ask you a question. Do you have both phone systems as well?
We do not have the voiceover.
System.
We're just the analog right now. We haven't been switched over.
Nobody has in that building.
But even when they do switch over, we're going to fall into the same categories of police and fire, where we're going to retain some analog lines, I'm sure.
Okay.
We good?
Mhm.
The next line is the Agri supply line. What that is, it's new for this year. It's a line for our canines. We have a bomb search dog that we have that was given to us by the federal government, and we also have a drug detection dog. Both of these dogs are handled by 295 deputies, the two full-time 295 deputies. And that line would be to cover food and vet bills and stuff.
Okay.
Next one is uniforms. It's an ongoing line we use every year. I've kind of put off buying any more uniforms through the rest of the year, just to save a little bit of money.
Okay.
Next one is the miscellaneous. I think we covered that a little bit on some other people, but and March can correct me if I'm wrong, but what I've been told that is, it's a line that the recovery line was used for that historically over the years. Like when we work for the schools and things, and we bill for the overtime and then they pay us back. That's what it was explained to me. It was a cost recovery line, but now we have a cost recovery line. So I assume that will go away, but that's not money that we've spent or used or anything.
Right. You're correct, Sheriff. And it's shown in the current budget as zeroed out.
Okay.
No, it doesn't. It's 12,000 for next year.
12,000 is uniforms. Miscellaneous expenses zero.
Oh, okay. They spent 8,000.
No, well, that's
Cost
8,000 that we bill, if you will.
Okay, so 8,000 that you budgeted, you didn't spend any of it. What does the negative mean?
No, so it's when the sheriff works a football game. And so that's the 8,000 in the negative is what we bill to get the cost recovery. So it's just a tracking of that expense. It goes into the negative because we didn't budget anything for it. But we have a cost recovery line now, as the sheriff said, where we take care of that. And then we've zeroed it out for the next year, the coming year, because we have that cost recovery line.
So where's the cost recovery line on here?
I think we have a general cost recovery line, not one in the specific budget.
Mr. Terry, do you know?
We have a recovery for each
Department?
For each department.
But if it's not itemized here, then you don't have it. I don't see
Say that again.
cost recovery for him.
You're probably looking at expenditure. You're probably looking at expenditure report, and it would be in the revenue report.
Okay. All right.
Because that's the revenue. You're now dealing with expenditures.
That's right. Thank you so much.
Yes, ma'am.
That is so funny.
What?
Whatever she laughing about.
And I'm looking at my budget worksheet. There is a line at the very top that says cost recovery, and it says $11,000 on it.
Okay. On the expense report or revenue?
I don't have, mine doesn't show that. Mine just
Okay. Okay.
current
Yeah.
projected and city manager. The next thing
Okay.
on my list was benefits for part-time employees that work on 295. Oh no, does the full-time? I had two-part question. The first one is, do the part-time employees receive benefits? They receive PTO, paid time off, like the full-timers do, but it's at it's budgeted at a rate of whatever the full-time equivalent is. In other words, they have to work 1,040 hours a year to qualify for PTO. And if they hit that mark, whatever amount they work that year is carried over to the next. That's what they get for the following year. And I believe they have some dental benefits that they have to pay for. The city doesn't pay for that. And then the second part of that question is the full-time employee work 295. I have two guys that are assigned to 295 that are full-time.
Full-time.
Yes.
Now, is it appropriate? Do you have now what, oh, no, I can't talk to you. I'm sorry.
Talk to who? Me?
No, can I go, Madam Mayor, ask a question?
Sure.
The revenues for 295, can you give us a report on what y'all, I guess we've made this year thus far, or?
I can't, no, ma'am, I don't have those.
Okay, that's fine. I'll just ask in general. Okay, thanks.
But I think they're very easy to get. I mean, anyway, I can get them to you though, if you'd like them. Next one is service contracts. It says Pastor Mr. Altman. I'm just going to skip over that. It's the same service contract as, but I have two budgets, 295 and then the rec courts, but my service contracts are split between the two. So I don't know do you have any more questions about the service contracts?
No, sir.
Okay. E-ticketing, and your comment is thought this cost was associated with General District Court. And that is true. It is associated with General District Court. I'm not sure how the nuts and bolts of it is. It's a fee that's charged by General District Court. And I'm assuming that's what is put back into this e-ticketing line. By statute, that's where it has to come back to be used for the e-ticketing equipment.
I just remember us approving for money to go to a clerk in the General District Court for e-ticketing. I didn't realize your office got money for that as well, but you do the ticketing itself, so I guess that makes sense.
Well, we do. Each car has the equipment. We've got it's all kind of things involved with that. But and I don't know a whole lot about what the clerk gets, but that might be true. There might be a position in there, and I don't know if it was for e-ticketing or if it was for the 295 program in whole.
It was 295 program because of the processing they say they were doing.
Right.
Program.
I believe that's still in place, but Mr. Altman would know that better than me. And the last line is to add the additional furniture fixture line. I think that was discussed also. That's just a line that's used for, we don't buy furniture with it, but printers, computers, anything to do with our networking stuff is what that's used for. And that was all of them that I had that needed explaining. Unless you guys have anything else, I'd be happy to answer them if you do.
Thank you.
Thank you, Sheriff Caphart. I'll do a random robin, and Councilor Cum, your hand is raised, so can you lower it, please, so I can make sure if it's a new request or old one. Councilor Randolph, do you have any questions right now?
No, ma'am, thank you. It's pretty self-explanatory.
Councilor Denton?
I
Vice
was
Mayor
muted.
Bennett?
I was muted. I'm sorry. No, it was a very good explanation. I'm fine. Thank you.
Vice Mayor Bennett? Councilor Randolph, Councilor Holloway?
Thank you, Chair Pot.
Ma'am?
Thank you
Well,
for the
thank you.
report.
Yes, ma'am.
I'm sorry, I was having problems with my mute button, but no, I have no questions. Thank you.
Okay. Counselor Plum, do you have any other questions?
No.
Sheriff Caphart, I have one question and it should be an easy one, hopefully. I know we've discussed overtime or additional monies for the deputies that support the council meetings. And I saw if Mr. Altman can scroll up to the sheriff's section of the sheriff's budget, the top section. I saw there was an increase of $15,000, if I read that correctly. But I think one year it was $17,000 last year. So with this $15,000, you think it will be enough to cover the monies to pay for the protection that we get for the council meetings?
Yes, ma'am, it would.
Okay.
I believe it will. Yeah, that's, let me just check something real quick. Yes, ma'am. That it would be. And we do, not just that, it's a lot of things that we cover. Not all of them for the city, but well, I guess basically they all are all for the city, but we have the courts that run over. We have a ton of different city functions that we do that aren't contract paid, and I pay the guys to do them. So yes, but to answer your question, I believe that's enough. Unless you just want to donate some more, that would be fine too.
People are going to kill us if we keep giving away money, but I know I just wanted to make sure that we address that, because I remember that coming up. I wanted to make sure we at least touched on that topic that you shared. So I'm glad that's sufficient. Thank you, Mr. Altman, for making sure that was in the budget. I don't think anyone else has any questions. And Sheriff Caphart, thank you again for your time as well. I know you were on the call Tuesday. We talked to you after the meeting, the city manager and I, and thank you for being patient and willing to work with us as we do all these work sessions. Be safe and enjoy the rest of your night, sir.
Thank you very much.
Thank
all
you.
of y'all.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
All right, Mr. Altman, the next person. And before we go there, the only question I have for the sheriff was 295 revenue. Is that what you're tracking as well?
Yes, ma'am, and I can answer that question for you now.
Go ahead. Scratch off as much as off our list as possible.
In the current year, I think we were somewhere in the neighborhood, and I don't have the exact dollar amount, but we were about $650,000. We're usually in the neighborhood of 1.5 million. In the upcoming budget, we're projecting an increase of revenue there to $750,000. So I think the sheriff had explained there's some just having the manpower out, but also we have I believe a new judge in the house. So getting used to that, but we're anticipating him, and he and I have talked about getting the deputies back out on 295 and getting that going again, because that obviously was a big driver of our capital program. And if you were to go and look, if you have an opportunity in the revenue aspect, in the revenue section, the very last page of as we do the revenue by fund breakout, you'll see a transfer from the 295 money, general fund 295 money of 200,000 to the capital fund, the fund 71. Typically that would be much higher, but because of the reduction in revenue and the need to support the sheriff's 295 budget, so we're a little short, but he and I have had a conversation. He's committed to getting the folks back out on the street. But I think in the current year, and we still have a little bit of time to go, but we're not running as high as we used to do. We're about half of where we used to hit on 295 money.
Thank you. Councilor Pelham, you have your hand raised.
I was going to ask that question. Out of the 650, you're saying 200,000 so far be going to the capital fund.
Well, of the projected 750, 200 would go toward capital. We're a little short on usually the 295 fund really is a heavy supporter of our capital program.
Right.
Because of the reduction in revenue, we don't have as much to move over this year to help handle some capital issues.
Okay. I just want everybody to know you don't get that total 650. It's prorated for other things. So
right. Yeah, we have to pay for his deputies, and we have to support that program. But anything above support, we get to capture and bring over into the capital fund.
Madam Mayor, can I speak to that one more little point to that?
Yes, I was hoping that you're still on. Yes, sir. Go ahead.
I had to stay to listen. And everything that the city manager said is correct. And the only thing I'll add back to that, and I don't deal with what happens with the money when we're done, but because of the reduction in employees for such a time, there's probably going to be about 100,000 in salary that will come back that we don't use. And then of course there'll be some fuel and money that kind of, so I'm looking at probably about $250,000. I don't know how y'all recapture that. It goes back into the general fund or what happens to it. I don't know, but there could be a sizable amount there to be used for something.
Thank you.
Thank you for that information. Appreciate it. Is there any other questions regarding this before we move on regarding the 295 funds or anything else for Sheriff Kephart based off of what was just shared? Councilor Palm?
Nope.
Okay, thank you very much. Okay, Mr. Ottman, you can go to the next slide and we'll take off the 295 revenue unless Councilor Palm wants that to be followed up with the actual munis number.
No, Marsh, Mr. Altman can tell us now, would that extra 250 go back to the general fund or will it go back to capital?
So anything in the general fund budget. So if it's an item that he has that because doesn't have people out there as much and we have salary savings, that rolls to the bottom line of the general fund at the end of the year. Capital a capital project will continue across budget years, but anything in his general fund budget that he doesn't spend or any department doesn't spend rolls to our bottom line at the end of the year, and that goes to fund balance.
And you're capturing those monies as well, that we're no grand total that has been placed back in the general fund.
Right. So when at the end of the year, when we finish, cut off all of our expenditures and pay all of our bills, and typically you still have bills coming in into August for expenses. Once we do that and pay everything off that we charge back to the 2019 budget or 2020 budget, we'll be able to tell council at that point in time where we are roughly with what falls to the bottom line. And then of course we go through our CAFR process, and at the end of the CAFR, then we have a definitive number of what falls after we're audited.
Yeah. Well, I would like, you give us a general number in June the 30th, whatever, in July, and then we can take away from that as we go. That's what I recommend. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you, Mr. Altman. You can go to the next guest speaker, please.
So our last department this evening is recreation, and we have Mr. Reed Miller on the line.
What happened to circuit court? Oh,
I
Circuit court. Go ahead, Mr. Altman.
Go ahead, Ms. Gore.
Mr. Altman shared at the beginning of the work session that he asked where Ms. Ward was, but council shared that she had answered most of their questions, so she did not.
I'm talking about the other circuit court, the guy that the page 23. That's
the one that you asked Mr. Newman about, and he said that he didn't know where he was at either, because that's not part of his department. Right. So
that's separate.
So that budget is where we and Prince George support jointly the legal intern for the circuit court judges. And I was flipping through my
and we paid $45,000 for one lawyer. And
you had asked me a question in an email, and I'd actually found it and then I put it away. So there's one attorney, and we share the cost with Prince George, but the law intern is $55,000 and some odd. But we budget it, and Prince George reimburses us. So we have to we budget the full amount, and then Prince George reimburses us their portion of the cost. And then also we have operating costs with that individual that we have. So and then you'd also asked about we have a share of a circuit court secretary and a circuit court administrator that we share with Prince George and Greensville. Our portion of those funds are for the secretary is a little bit more than $10,000, and for the court administrator it's $31,000. So all told in there, it's about $112,000. So those are shared costs across the circuit, if you will, that
And
we're,
where's the reimbursement line come?
that would be in the revenue side.
Okay, okay, so just remind me, show me where that is later then. And what, did you find out why they spend so much money in miscellaneous?
No, I haven't. That's that item that came up. That was first I'd heard of that one this evening. So I have a line item. I have a question written down. What 3154 in miscellaneous?
They went from 13,000 there to 41,500.
Right. I have a note to find out.
So just for clarity, and Councilor Pelham, you can ask this at the end of the meeting because wasn't one of the departments that we had planned to discuss today. So we need to move to Parks and Recreation, and at the end of the meeting, we want to go back and talk about the other constitutional officers and courts. We can circle back to that, but let's just keep focused on the departments that we're on right now, and that's Parks and Recreation.
Thank you.
And just as a note, I'm sorry, Mr. Altman, Vice Mayor Bennett just let me know that she dropped off on accident. Her computer is updating, so she'll be back on when it finishes. So she's having the same kind of issues I'm having, except for mine is not updating. And so we'll track for her when she gets back on. And Madam Clerk, just make a note of that in your record right now. The time is 8:12, and we'll just check to see when she gets back on it and annotate when she's joined back in the meeting, okay?
What page is that on, Mark?
It's page 76.
Thank you.
So we've got Mr. Reed Miller's budget up with recreation, and he has several divisions underneath him. And I will let Mr. Reed Miller go through the highlights of his budget.
Right. Thank you, Mr. Altman. Good evening, Madam Mayor, Madam Vice Mayor, if she's back on, members of council. We do have a bit of a long budget. There are a lot of individual line items. We're broken into 7 main recreation cost centers, and that's for the recreation center here at the community center. And then we have different programming areas like athletics, aquatics, community, and special events. And then we have a parks division or cost center, and then a grants cost center. We don't use those accounts anymore. Those have actually been updated to new accounts. And then in an entirely separate fund, Fund 38 is for the marina. And I think that's at the end of your report. That's a relatively small budget with minimal activity. I didn't receive any specific questions ahead of time. I'm not sure if there were any. I did not receive any. I know there have been questions with other budgets regarding service contracts. I'd be happy to discuss those in more detail. Those are most prominent in the Recreation Center budget division and the Parks budget division, where we have most of our maintenance operations. And then miscellaneous and other accounts. We do have some miscellaneous accounts. They're relatively small, but I'll do my best to explain those. And then we don't have any management services or any other professional services line items like that. We are not funded for those. If we're pursuing something along those lines, it's typically part of a capital project. And capital funds are used, or we would use in-house services or in-kind services for something like that. So if there are any particular questions, I'm happy to answer them, or any further discussion on what we're looking for the next fiscal year. Happy to answer those questions.
Thank you, Mr. Reed Miller. So just to streamline this as best as possible, I'll just tell you up front, can you just address, because I know what the questions, some of them are going to be up front. I know you touched on some of the topics, but in particular, let's go over your postage, because that's been asked several times. Your miscellaneous, even though it's a small amount, because that's been discussed several times. And then uniforms, that's all I can see right now. That seems to be a reoccurring question, and then I'll jump in and let people ask individual questions, but let's try to get the ones that are repeat questions out the way first, please.
Sure. Yes, ma'am. Jumping to those immediately, the postage out of the community center, that's used for a variety of things. It's not always used in its full amount. But for example, if we have a major policy change or membership update, something like that, we will try to send a postcard out to all of our active members here at the community center. Additionally, the community center kind of also serves as our administrative budget. So a lot of our administrative function is handled through the community center budget because we don't have a separate director's budget or administrative budget. So when we're working on, for example, a public input meeting for, let's say, a park development project, and we send out an invitation to surrounding homes or neighborhoods, we will pay the postage for that out of the community center, kind of acting as our administrative budget. Same thing with big events like the City Point 5K. We typically send a mailer out to all the residents that live along the route just to say, hey, don't forget, a couple of weeks from now, streets are going to be closed down. Here's some additional information. And we pay for the postage for those items out of that line item.
Thank you. So that was postage, and it kind of dipped into ads and uniforms and miscellaneous, and then I'll call on Councilor Pell.
Yeah, uniforms, that essentially just covers our t-shirts and polo shirts and jackets and things like that we outfit our staff in so they can easily be recognized as employees of the department. Essentially, we pay for all of our programming staff and recreation staff through this recreation center line item. And then parks, and the parks division, they have a separate uniforms and apparel budget that's a little higher because we do provide additional outerwear because those guys are out in the elements. We do provide hats, jackets for them that are a little more heavy duty. And then they participate in the work boot program as well, where they're provided a pair of steel toe boots since they are in a maintenance position. The miscellaneous for this, I don't know that we actually use this $300 for the rec center. If anything, if the budget were to get tight in a particular area, or if we spilled over in an area, an overage that we didn't anticipate, we would likely go to that as one of the first budgets to transfer into another operating area. So it's a very, very, very small little slush fund, if you will. We could probably easily move that $300 into a more established account and make it work there. That's kind of a remnant of the past. One thing I noticed when I got here 5 years ago, a lot of things were being charged to miscellaneous just because there was some confusion on what should go where, what should be charged to. And if there was any doubt, the collect all became the miscellaneous account, and rightfully so. That's kind of what it's intended for. But we do not use miscellaneous accounts for much of anything unless it's something extremely rare or a one-time occurrence where we know we're not going to do this again. And it doesn't fit into any of the other existing object numbers. We will charge it to miscellaneous in lieu of creating another line item that won't be used very much. And then I'm sorry, I know I'm missing one that you brought up. What have I overlooked? I'm sorry.
The miscellaneous in the other two accounts to the $500,000.
No, you didn't miss any of the points I asked for you to address. You covered postage, uniforms, miscellaneous, and ads you kind of dipped into, so I think you covered it. Before we go to Councilor Plum for her questions, I see that Vice Mayor Bennett is back joining us. And Madam Clerk, did you track the time she joined us back so we can have it in the minutes?
I was on when Director Reed Miller started talking.
I have her back at 8:15.
Mm-hmm.
Perfect. Okay, great. Just want to make sure we track it. Thank you, Vice Mayor Bennett. And thank you, Madam Clerk. Okay. So, Mr. Reeder, yes, you did address that. So I'll call on Councilor Plum for her questions.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Reed Miller. And I know people want to know why you explained the $300 line item, but there's also $500 and $1,000 in the other two funds of the five that you have. So they are just used for like you say, all slush funds, just in case something comes up that you don't have covered. But you're gonna find a place for them in the future, right?
Specifically, which divisions are you referring to? I'm
Okay.
only looking at the
Okay.
recreation center.
$500 in the athletic fund and $1,000 in the, I think it's $1,000 in the
Community or events, I think.
somewhere. Wait a minute, I had it.
And-
And one of the other, one's 300, one's 1,000, one's 500.
Right.
Anyway, you
so-
explained it, so. You don't
For-
have-
there are some other legitimate uses. So for example, with our athletics division, when we qualified to go to the state tournament and the World Series earlier in this fiscal year, we have to pay tournament entry fees. And that's something obviously that we only do if we qualify for a tournament. It's not a guaranteed expenditure each year. We don't have a line item specifically for tournament entry fees. That wouldn't qualify as a service contract or a supply or anything like that. So that kind of rare occurrence, that is something, for example, in athletics that we would truly charge to a miscellaneous expense because it is rare, it's not common, and it doesn't fit into any of the other line items.
Okay, and the janitorial supplement that you have, why do you have a separate janitorial supplement when we have a janitorial contract for the whole city?
We were not part of that contract when it was awarded through the third-party vendor. We actually handle all of our facility maintenance in-house. We have a full-time maintenance employee. We have several part-time custodians who work specifically at the community center, and then of course they assist with our concession buildings and our park restrooms and things like that. So we essentially do our janitorial work or our custodial work in-house. We purchase our own cleaning supplies, and we do that internally. We do not contract that out to a third-party vendor. And as far as I know, that's always the way we've done it. And I think part of that has to do with our being a separate building and then having kind of odd operating hours in terms of, the standard business world of 9 to 5. We of course open earlier and close later. So the staff work kind of different hours to cover our operational hours.
And also under recreational center, you have an EAP program, and that normally is with the human resources. It's a small amount again of $100, but you don't do EAP with the human resource employment assistance program.
No, we do. That's a part of that program. We don't enter any of those figures or those dollar amounts. Those are loaded, I think, jointly between finance and HR. But essentially, it's the same program. Just if we had an employee who took advantage of those services, whatever that cost related to that service was, it would be billed back to our recreation center line item instead of to the HR budget.
Okay. And then all your temporary vendors and consultant type expenditures are just contracts that you do throughout the year for all your programs, correct?
That's correct. Temporary vendors for the community center is relatively small. You'll see that number increase in the program areas. For example, special events. So anytime and I'm sorry, I keep referring to it as events. That's what it appears as on our reports. It's still listed as community on the report that you're looking at now. So that budget division that comes after rec center, it's titled community, but that's essentially our special events division.
That's 42 grand. That's not a little bit.
That's a big one, but that's every time we hire a band, and of course we have an entire concert series, and then with big family events, that's every time we hire any sort of entertainer. If we hire, for example, a petting zoo to come to an event.
Right. I understand that, but so what's the difference in that temporary vendor compared to the one that's at the recreation center?
So through the rec center, we don't really hire individual businesses to come in and do things specifically for the rec center. So if we were bringing in like a performer that was going to perform at the rec center, that would typically be handled through one of the program divisions as part of that programming effort, not as part of the rec center. The rec center would just be the facility where the event is held. So the little bit of temp vendors we have here, like if we pay a fitness instructor to come in, because we don't have, oddly enough, we don't have a separate fitness programming division. We'd love to have one day. We don't have that. So if we have to bring in a fitness vendor to run like a new type of class or something, we'll pay that out of temporary vendors through the community center. But the special events temporary vendors, obviously there are a lot more of them. They're expensive. And a big chunk of that is to pay our fireworks vendor for fireworks. That probably makes up a 25% of that budget.
Yes, you wanted a few department and your educational tuition assistance.
We do. That's new. We work that into the budget. I think this current fiscal year or next fiscal.
Oh, no. For the parks is not new. You've been doing it since fiscal year 2015-16.
Well, there's a long
$1,000 now, huh?
There's a long backstory to that, and I don't want to get too off topic, but what you're seeing back in the prior fiscal years, that is a direct result of the Munis switchover. We actually ran into a situation when we switched to Munis, all of our conferences, conventions, and lodging got grouped into one line item in our parks division that requires the least amount of that. And it was titled tuition reimbursement. So we've been working to correct that over the last couple of years, and we've gotten those conferences and convention funds moved back into the respective divisions where they're supposed to be now. But we do have, this is a new endeavor. We do have tuition reimbursement that we hope to use for continuing higher education or pursuing a professional certification or certificate as a part of their.
So the $3,000 you had programmed for this year, you didn't use $2,300 of that for education tuition reimbursement?
Not yet this year. No, we have not.
And now the $8,400 in the parks area, you haven't used that either. You haven't used $6,000 of that.
I'm sorry. Would it be possible to scroll to that? Yeah.
On page 79. And then $2,500 is, or $185 is used for seniors, for people, I guess, that work with the senior department.
And I'm sorry, you're asking specifically about tuition reimbursement? Is that?
I guess /tuition assistance look like.
Right, yeah, that's education tuition assistance.
Oh, okay, I'm looking at the wrong line.
Yeah, so that is relatively new. Like I said, we haven't had that in past years. That 5,000 is new. We do hope to offer that to the staff who are interested in it. There has been quite a bit of interest, so that is a starting point. But no, we have not awarded any of that tuition assistance just yet.
What's ED Rec Supply? What does that stand for?
That's education and recreation supplies. So that's essentially all of our tangible supplies that we use for programming. That really is probably our most common budget line item across the whole spectrum. I mean, that's any supply we're buying from any vendor, whether it be Amazon or Sam's Club or Party City, for this event or that program or that class, it's charged to education and recreation supplies.
And it might not be a question for you, but I see in some budgets like yours, you have to pay electrical services. Why do y'all pay electrical bill? I thought the city don't pay all the electrical bills for everyone.
No, we handle all of our own utility bills. So that's including gas, electric, water, sewer.
Sewer, yeah.
We have line items built in for that. And I think, again, that's just because we're a freestanding operation. And I think some of that is also rooted in history, in that at one time, recreation was not a formal city department, but now that's many, many, many years ago. But there are still some things where it's almost like we're set up a little differently than other departments. Keep in mind our budget, you can go to the end and see a total number, but that is not the total amount of general fund dollars that we actually get. The general fund support is smaller than our actual budget total. And then the difference is made up in the revenues we collect through registrations, facility rentals, membership sales. And that's just a traditional way of recreation operating in Hopewell, and it's not uncommon, but there are rec departments that are just completely funded out of the general fund. There are rec departments that kind of operate like we do as kind of a quasi enterprise fund where we support a little bit of our own operation with a little bit of revenue we bring in. And then they're rare, but there are rec departments out there that are aimed at being totally self-sufficient, but they are 100% fee-based and essentially run like a private business. And just a personal opinion, I'm not sure that would work in our community.
And two other questions. And then the electrical utilities that's at the marina. Why do we pay that if we have someone running the marina?
So that's not for the marina where the store is and where the boat ramp is, where the docks are. So all of those electrical services are paid by the marina, the lease operator at the marina. So on the other side of the marina, formerly known as Riverside Harbor Park, but it's essentially part of the marina, there are several street lights that were put in, and we essentially pay a flat monthly rate to have those street lights on our property for security lighting, and that's what that would be used for.
That the guy that owns that building pays his own electric in his own name?
That's correct. We do not pay electric for the store at the marina, and then the individual slips at the marina, they all have their own individual electric meter that is tied to their boat slip. So if they want electricity at their boat slip, they have to set it up through Dominion Power, and they have their own meter and their own separate service.
And one other question. In the contingency, you have now a new contingency fund for the marina for $5,000. What is that going to be used for?
The marina is a bit of an unpredictable thing for local government to own and operate. That is there specifically to assist with if we run into a situation, and I know we've run into this in the past, and Councilor Pelham, you may remember some of this because I think it became a legal matter several years ago. But when a boat sinks at the marina, like if it's a rented slip, it can become a very difficult legal matter. And as we've seen in recent years, if a boat sinks and starts leaking fuel or hydraulic fluid, it can then become a environmental issue that we have to address very, very quickly. And that contingency line item, although it is very small and probably would not cover the full cost, it does give us kind of an emergency fund in the event that we have a sunken vessel or extreme damage to something down there or an environmental concern that we have to address very quickly.
Okay. Well, okay, yeah. So that explains that. Okay.
The nature of the marina and the age of the marina honestly probably warrants a larger contingency than what we have. Just because it's not always feasible for us to come to council to request funding before we can make a repair. Oftentimes that takes several weeks, and sometimes we have to make a repair very rapidly out of, in the name of public safety. So it's there, and it helps protect us against those unforeseen circumstances, which at the marina are probably more of a realistic possibility than any other facility we have.
Thank you very much.
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you, Mr. Reed Miller. Does anyone else on council have any questions at this time? Okay. I have two quick questions. The first is, do you know by chance how much revenue the community center or Parks and Recreation has received this year or the year prior for your fund?
I would have to look I'd have to run a report to find the exact number, Mayor Gore, but I can tell you it's typically between about $150,000 on a slow year, and we've been over $200,000 on a good year. And when I say slow year, I don't mean that necessarily in a business sense, but that's, if we have a very rainy summer or a very hot summer, we're going to do less picnic pavilion rentals. Or if we have to cancel a lot of classes, for example, right now, the situation we're dealing with coronavirus, when we look back on this budget, our revenues are going to take a tremendous hit in this fiscal year because essentially we haven't done anything to bring in revenue since mid-March. But we're normally in the ballpark of about $200,000 in terms of revenue.
Thank you. And for the auction that you do annually, what do you average? Has that seen an increase as well? Because I know some things have changed, and I'm just trying to check for the residents that's watching to know, for them to know that you have two sources of revenue that goes into your department. So this is more so an education question.
Sure, absolutely. And even to expand on that, we do have several reimbursement programs we participate in as kind of a third source of revenue as well that plays a role in that. To address your question about the auction, the amount of money we make from the auction is directly correlated to how many new vehicles are approved in the capital budget. So I know this year our capital budget is very lean with everything that's going on. I don't think any vehicle replacement has been funded, meaning old vehicles that would be surplus will not be surplus. They'll kind of limp through another year. And I say that because we have some vehicles that are limping pretty badly. But if we replace, 6 or 7 vehicles, that typically equates to auctioning off 6 or 7 vehicles that can go from anywhere from a couple $100s to several $1,000s. So in my time in the position since 2015 or late 2014, I think the most we've collected from a surplus auction is around $18,000 or maybe $20,000. The least is 3 or 4. We've had some very slow year. I think last year was one of the lowest years we did with I believe that was $5,000 or $6,000. So that's a direct correlation with vehicles. If we don't have any vehicles to auction off, then the auction brings in very little money and office furniture and obsolete computer equipment, things like that. There's just not much that sells for much money.
Thank you. And I have 2 other questions. This is more so about your budget. The first one is I saw, it looks like it says credit card fees under the recreation. I'm not familiar with that. And then the other question I have is regarding supporting the sports program. So you can answer that one, then I'll ask you the last question I have, sir.
Right. So the credit card convenience fees, that since we do a lot of transactions here, any transaction that's done in person at the front desk at the community center, if someone uses a credit card, we have to pay a fee for that transaction. It's not automatically passed on to the customer. Now, the good thing about the online purchases that we've implemented through a second system, we don't have to worry about that for the online registrations, and those are very, very popular. So it's reducing the amount of in-person. But anything we do in person, we essentially get a bill from a credit card processing company for every transaction that we make, and we have to pay them for the service of processing credit cards.
So this has come up with some residents in general for the city, and I was guessing that's what it was because I couldn't think of anything else that you would have to have that for.
Right.
I would like to talk to city manager more about this, or even the treasurer, because the same thing happens when you use credit cards throughout the city, and in some other localities, they already eat the cost as a whole. So it wouldn't just be your one department doing it. It'd be any type of credit card that's used throughout the city that the locality takes that hit. And so I would like to explore that a little bit more because I received a good number of those complaints regarding that in our online billing, which is why I keep asking, when are we going to move to online billing throughout the city as a whole? So thanks for letting me know confirming that's what it was. And I'll follow up about that a little bit later.
One thing, if I can share, Mayor Gore, in regard to that, one thing that's important to understand, we are limited on the providers that we can work with based on the software we use for our point of sale. So we use a software called RecTrack right now, which we hope to replace with a vendor that can handle online and in person under the same umbrella. So we're not using 2 different systems concurrently. But with RecTrack, we're limited on the vendors we can use for credit card service fees. So if you have the treasurer's office using a particular software, they may be limited to the number of vendors they can choose from. And same holds true with the software we use. So that may be part of the reason why we have, a vendor for credit cards here and a different vendor there. But certainly if we could consolidate it, that would make our lives a little easier.
Thank you. And the last question I had, I've been speaking with some parents that have their children in some of the sports programs. And this year we started trying to recognize, because I had a constituent call about trying to recognize their teams. And some of the feedback I received is, I guess Parks and Recreation or the community center staff shared that there's going to be one annual celebration moving forward to recognize all of the different sports teams and their coaches. If that's true, where is that supported in the budget? So, and do you think you have enough to cover those things? So I think right now coaches kind of pay for some of these services, the awards programs for their participants and attendees. And so I just want to make sure we have some funding there, if that is the move to go to like one big annual celebration.
So you're correct. That is a goal of ours, is to move, especially for our younger age groups, not necessarily our competitive sports when the kids get a little older, but our preschool and our T-balls and things like that, where the end of the year banquet is kind of a big deal, and you get a medal or a trophy or whatever. We are trying to do consolidated banquets simply because the tradition has been that each coach would coordinate, take a collection from parents, set up a pizza party or a pool party or, whatever their choice was. We were learning that coaches, for whatever reason, were not coordinating that end of year banquet. They were just kind of ending the season and going about their way. And of course, we heard from disappointed parents that, their team never had a banquet, and they don't understand why, Johnny from down the street, his team had a pool party at Wooddale and it was awesome and they didn't even get anything. So we're trying, looking at that through an equity lens, how do we fix that? And our solution is we take it over. We essentially provide a participation award because these are younger kids, just congratulating them on making it through the season. We had requested an increase in recreation supplies in our budget to cover this. I believe it was a $8,000 or $10,000 increase. I'd have to look back. That was not only for the end of year ceremonies. It's also the cost of athletic equipment just continues to rise regularly. That's an account that we have to continue to request because the cost of running youth athletics is very expensive. But with a flatline budget, I don't believe we've been provided any additional funding in that category. However, we have canceled all of our spring sports, so that's a significant savings in cost. And it looks like there's a chance that we won't be able to have fall sports either. So if in fiscal year 21, if the only thing we can do are winter and spring sports, the savings we would have from not holding regular fall competition would be enough to cover those expenses in the spring. But then when we move on to future fiscal years, for us to be able to do that, we're going to have an increase in the budget, or we're going to have to really work hard to find community sponsors that would come on board and help us cover those costs.
Thank you. And thanks for covering that in depth. And my only ask would be offline, when you, can you look at those numbers again that you submitted and what you are guesstimating if one season isn't in and the other one is in, how much money you think you potentially save, to see if those savings could cover the cost of a potential banquet, just to make sure that you would potentially have enough. Because as I shared, I get a lot of feedback regarding the sports programs from parents, and I know that many of them are looking forward to doing something like this. So if there's any way we can support on that end for that return, then we, definitely need to support that. So I'll put that down as an ask for you, but I don't have any other questions. Thank you so much for that again. Is any other member of council have any questions for Mr. Reed Miller?
No, ma'am.
Councilor Randolph?
No, ma'am.
Councilor Denton?
No, ma'am.
Vice Mayor Bennett?
No, thank you, Director Reed Miller.
You're welcome.
Councilor Holloway?
No, thank you, Mr. Reed Miller.
Councilor Pelham?
No, usual.
All right, Mr. Altman, the only two takeaways I have from this section is the check, I guess, with the treasurer's office or whoever would be the point person for looking at these credit card fees. And then to see for Mr. Rick Miller to give us a little bit more of an estimate about this end of the year banquet and some potential savings. Are you doing that as well?
Those are the two items that I have for recreation. Yes, ma'am.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Reed Miller, for your time. And council, this is the last department that we have scheduled for tonight, if I'm not mistaken, Mr. Altman.
That's correct, ma'am.
So as I shared earlier, Councilor Plum was asking about the courts section that wasn't included as a speaker, but it kind of fits into the constitutional office area of the budget. So I just want to make sure that we do not forget to go back to that, just to make sure and to be fair. Mr. Altman and I do have the one question that was asked numerous times about the miscellaneous expenditure for the court section. He has that written down. I do as well. Councilor Pelham, is there anything else regarding that section that you need to have questions answered about?
I forgot what page was it on? I did write down something.
It was in a 101s or something, I think.
No, not that far.
In
Not
the
that
middle
far.
of the report, it's
I get it.
23, maybe.
Yeah, I have it. 23 exactly. The vendor that they have for $5,000 and his office supplies are $7,900. That doesn't seem like a lot of supplies for one small lawyer office.
So again, this isn't just the.
I know, well, whatever we prorate into divide by 2 on one things and 3 by another, correct?
Correct.
Okay, so whatever part we pay, I don't know. It should be broke in somewhere like in this munis form. And those type of things be notated as a note on this particular page. Cost is reimbursed by whatever percentage or something. Is that possible?
I don't know if it's possible to do that.
If it is, please do that. Then it wouldn't be a question. So, and even in the miscellaneous, the other counties div it up as well, right?
I'll have to find out what that cost is, but yes, I mean, we share costs for those, the 3 positions are shared. We share those costs for all of those costs across the either the 2 or the 3 jurisdictions, depending upon which.
And so the lawyer, secretary, who else is in this?
So there's the law intern, which we split with Prince George. There's a circuit court secretary and a circuit court administrator that we share with both Prince George and Greenville County.
And so that all 3 of those people's salary for us is only $45,000.
Well, our shares.
That's what I'm saying. But some things that if the salary is shared, but these other numbers, I know it's not, divide 45 into 2 would be 23,000. That's all we're paying for the intern. Anyway, in other words, I would like to know the actual cost that we're paying.
Okay.
Okay, because that don't seem right.
Mr. Altman, are you clear on what her questions are for this section? I'm tracking 3 if I understand correctly.
Yeah, I've got them.
Okay. Are there any other questions regarding this section that we covered tonight?
And I was
Mr.
Altman,
can you make it,
my hand is up. Can I ask him?
Okay, can you wait 1 second? Yes, I see your hand is up. Can you wait 1 moment, Councilor Pelham? 1 second. Is anyone else have any questions for this section? Should we go back to Councilor Pelham?
No, ma'am, thank you.
And I do see your hand, I promise you. Mr. Altman, the only question I have is, can you try to work in court services into your, when we either get to outside agencies, is that going to be a part of there with Woody and Miss Tammy?
We can work them in. I hadn't planned on that. I was just looking at outside agencies, which is that all those items like Richard Bland and
Yeah.
those. But we can, if you want to work with court services, we can try to do that.
I don't
Yeah,
have
I
any
can
questions.
check
I don't
to
have any
see-
questions for her. Sorry.
For who?
For the circuit court clerk.
Right, I wasn't asking if you had questions. I was talking to Mr. Altman about my request.
Okay, thank you.
You're doing right. You're welcome. Mr. Altman, so as I was sharing I understand what you mean by outside agencies. They have the biannual budget for court services, and I think this is the year that our budget submitted on their behalf. Like they submit our budget on our behalf. So since we're funded biannually, we'd like to see what they're putting in for the city of Hopewell. So I think that could fit under outside agencies if possible. If not, then can you just try to squeeze them in, please?
Sure.
Thank you. Councilor Pelham, you have another question or comment?
So are we gonna do the police department and fire department and places like that?
That'll
So
be the
Mr.
next.
Altman's already sent out the schedule regarding all of our upcoming work sessions.
Okay,
They are
I
on.
haven't seen. I look for that. And my question too was, what does the treasurer's office have to do with fees? I mean, she charges a fee, but is that a city policy? She wouldn't make the policy for the entire city, would she?
No, I didn't ask if she made a policy. I asked to check with her because she also collects money. And I know she was talking about there being fees with credit cards, transactions as well.
Mhm.
So it's just a point of person to talk to and we can go from there, but it's nothing. I mean, she's the treasurer, so we can ask her the question.
Oh, I know you can, but I'm just saying, she don't, is that something that you do, Mr. Altman?
So go ahead, Madam.
I'm not trying to be funny. Yeah, I put in my question, just like you put in your questions. If she's not the right person, we'll go to the correct person, but she can respond to let us know if she can have any advice. And like I shared, I already talked to her about this in the past, and she would be a good person to reference. Also, a good person would be IT, another good person would be finance. I'm just referencing her because I know she talked about it, but we can move forward and get our answers to figure out the best approach. And if she's not the right person, we can just go ask somebody else. Is there any other questions? Councilor Ralph, you have your hand raised.
Not for a question, but I'd like to make a motion to adjourn.
I'll second that. Motion's made by Councilor Randolph, seconded by Mayor Gore. Motions to adjourn, have discussion. Roll call, please, Madam Clerk.
Mayor Gore,
Yes.
Vice Mayor Bennett,
Yes.
Councilor Randolph,
Yes.
Councilor Holloway,
Yes.
Councilor Denton,
Yes.
Councilor Pelham.
Silence is a yes. We are adjourned. Thank you all. Be safe. Have a good night. And check
Thank
your
you.
emails, for all the messages that staff has sent out to us, okay? So we can get prepared for the next meeting. See y'all later.